Imagine waking up to find an orange HOA notice taped to your door. $1,500 fine for unauthorized boats on community property. There's just one tiny problem. I don't just own the lakefront property, I own the entire lake. When the HOA's fishing club started blocking my business and someone burned down my rental shed, I uncovered their shocking secret. They had no idea who they were messing with. The title story starts like this. Living by a lake has always been the great joy of my life. I grew up on this property where the water laps at the shore just 50 yards from our back porch. My parents bought this land back in the 70s when the area was mostly undeveloped wilderness. My dad was a carpenter who built our family home with his own two hands, and my mom was a teacher at the local elementary school. They were hardworking people who saved for years to buy this slice of heaven. The lake itself is about 30 acres of pristine water, home to bass, crappie and catfish. My childhood memories are filled with summer days spent fishing, swimming and canoeing across those cool waters. We actually owned the entire lake, not just the shore property, which was unusual but stemmed from how the original land parcels were divided when the county was first settled. This detail would become incredibly important later. For most of my childhood, we lived in peaceful isolation. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away and we knew that everyone within a 5-mile radius by first name. That all changed when I was around 12 years old. A developer bought the large tract of land adjacent to our property and began construction on what would become an upscale housing community. Within 2 years, dozens of large homes sprouted up like mushrooms after a rain, filled with city people eager for a countryside experience without giving up their suburban comforts. And well, soon after, they formed a homeowners association. The first interaction seemed innocent enough. A representative came by with a fruit basket to introduce himself to my parents. "We are so excited to be neighbors," he said with a too wide smile. "We would love to invite you to join our association. The benefits are tremendous." My dad, always polite but direct, declined and said, "Well, thank you, but we are happy as we are." The man's smile dimmed slightly. "I understand, but you should know that your property would increase in value if you joined. Plus, we will be implementing community standards that will make the entire area more desirable." "We appreciate your offer," my mom stepped in, "but our home is already exactly how we want it." Well, let me tell you, that should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Within months, we started receiving letters about concerns the HOA had with our property. Apparently, our dock did not meet their standards, our boathouse needed repainting, and the natural shoreline vegetation was unsightly and needed to be replaced with a manicured lawn instead. My dad would read these letters at the kitchen table, his face growing increasingly red. "This is ridiculous," he would mutter. "We don't belong to their group. They don't even have a say over our property." One evening, 2 HOA board members showed up unannounced. I remember watching from the living room window as they gesticulated wildly, pointing at various parts of our yard while my dad stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head. When he came back inside, I asked what they wanted. "They are trying to strong-arm us into joining their club," he explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "They say our rustic aesthetic is bringing down their property values." My mom looked worried. "Can they really force us to change things?" "No," my dad assured her. "Our property is not part of their development. They have absolutely no authority here." However, the pressure continued. Letters arrived weekly. HOA members would accidentally wander onto our property to comment on how we could improve things. Some would even use our lake without permission, claiming it was a community resource. When I was 15, things escalated further. The HOA, now governed by a particularly aggressive president, began issuing us fines for violation of their rules. My dad consulted a lawyer who confirmed what we already knew: they had no jurisdiction over our property. Further, our lawyer sent a cease and desist letter which brought us a few months of peace, but they never truly stopped. They just got more creative. They began calling county inspectors with fabricated complaints about our property. They would report noise violations when we had family gatherings. Once they even called animal control, claiming we had dangerous wildlife on our property, and by the way, we had a golden retriever named Buck who would not hurt a fly. Through it all though, my parents stood firm. My dad would often say, "This land is ours, we are not going to be bullied off it or into their HOA club." I admired their strength, but I could see the toll all of this was taking. My mom's hair grayed prematurely and my dad developed high blood pressure. Still, they refused to give in. When I left for college, I worried about them facing this battle alone. I called often and they always assured me that everything was fine, though I suspected they downplayed the conflicts to avoid worrying me. After graduation, I took a job that allowed me to work remotely so I could move back home. By then, both my mom and my dad were in their 60s and the ongoing tension with the HOA had definitely aged them beyond their years. "You don't need to come back for us," my mom protested when I told them my plans. "I want to," I assured her. "Besides, there's nowhere else I would rather live than by the lake." And that was true. Despite the HOA harassment, our property remained a sanctuary. I set up my home office in the spare bedroom, overlooking the water, and fell into a comfortable routine of work and helping my parents maintain the property. The HOA's tactics had evolved over the years. They had become more subtle but no less persistent. Their current president, a woman who lived in the largest house in the development, seemed to have made it her personal mission to either force us to join or to make our lives miserable. The fishing club was her favorite weapon. HOA members would cast their lines right at the edge of our property, sometimes accidentally crossing the boundary. They would leave trash trample my mom's garden beds near the shore and be unnecessarily loud early in the morning. My dad tried reasoning with them countless times. "We don't mind sharing the lake occasionally," he would explain, "but you need to respect our property and ask for permission." They would smile, nod, and then continue doing exactly as they pleased. One spring day, I was working on my laptop on the deck when I overheard a conversation between two fishing club members who did not realize that I was even there. "I heard the old man's health is not good," one said, reeling in his line. "Yeah," the other replied. "The wife doesn't look great either. Just a matter of time before they have to sell, and then the HOA can finally get control of this eyesore and the lake." My blood boiled, but I stayed silent. When I told my dad about it later, he just sighed. "People can be cruel, son, but don't worry. This land is staying in our family." 3 months later, my dad had a heart attack. He survived, but it weakened him considerably. My mom, who had been battling arthritis for years, struggled to pick up the slack in maintaining our home. I did what I could, but between caring for them and my job, it was challenging. The HOA and fake sympathy.
"We are so sorry about your husband's health,"
she told mom.
"It must be difficult maintaining such a large property at your age. Have you considered selling? We have several members who would make a very generous offers."
Mom, despite her physical pain, stood tall. "This is our home. We are not selling." The president's smile tightened.
"Well, the offer stands. But you should know that, as the community grows, the pressure on properties like yours that don't conform will only increase."
And yes, this was a thinly veiled threat and we all knew it. My dad's health continued to decline and within a year he was gone. The loss hit my mom and me hard. He had been our rock, our defender against a constant pressure from the HOA. At his funeral, I noticed several HOA board members in attendance, though I doubted their presence was out of genuine respect. Just 3 weeks after we buried my dad, Mom received another letter from the HOA expressing condolences but also concerns about recent neglect of our property. I had never seen my mom so angry. 30 years, she fumed, waving the letter. 30 years we have put up with their harassment and they cannot even let us grieve in peace. I took the letter from her hands. "I will handle this, Mom. You just focus on yourself." I drafted a response making it clear that any further communication should be directed to me, not my recently widowed mother. I also reminded them, yet again, that we are not part of their association and they had no authority over our property. The response came not in a letter, but in the form of the HOA president showing up at our door. "We understand that this is a difficult time," she said with a practiced expression of concern, "but the fact remains that your property's condition affects our entire community. Perhaps it is time to consider whether maintaining it is still feasible for your family." I felt a surge of the same protective anger I had seen in my father so many times before. "Our property is just fine, and it's none of your concern. Please just leave." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Your mother is alone now, and this place is obviously too much for you both. The HOA is prepared to make an offer that would allow her to live comfortably in a more manageable situation." "The answer is no," I said firmly. "Now, please respect our privacy during this difficult time." She left, but I knew it would not be the end. My mom lasted just 18 months after my dad. The doctor said it was heart failure, but I believe heartbreak played a role too. They had been together for over 40 years, and without him, her spark dimmed. In her final weeks, she made me promise two things: to take care of the property that had been our family home for decades, and to never give in to the HOA's pressure. "This land is your birthright," she told me, holding my hand with what little strength she had left. "Don't let them take it from you." I promised her that I wouldn't. After the funeral, I found myself truly alone for the first time in my life. The house felt emptier, the lake somewhat less magical without my parents to share it with, but it was still home, still the place where I felt closest to them. I threw myself into maintaining the property, determined to honor my parents' memory by keeping it as they would have wanted. So I repaired the dock, repainted the boathouse, and kept the gardens my mother had lovingly tended for decades. The HOA predictably gave me just 1 month of peace before the letters started again. Now they addressed me directly with a new angle. "As the new homeowner of the property, you have the opportunity to improve relations with the community by joining the HOA and bringing your property up to our standards." I placed this letter, and the many that followed, directly into the recycle bin. What I didn't know then was that the HOA had made a critical assumption. Based on conversations I later heard about, they believed that with both my parents gone, the lake itself would revert to state control or become public property. They had no idea that the deed my parents left me included clear ownership of the entire lake bed and water rights too. The HOA's ignorance would soon prove to be their downfall and my opportunity for the revenge my parents never lived to see. And yeah guys, if you have enjoyed this story so far, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel because that would help me tremendously. Especially since now at the moment the algorithm is really giving a hard time to pretty much every human reader while favoring the AI channels. Just YouTube being YouTube, I guess. 6 months after my mom's funeral, I found myself at a crossroads. The remote job I'd been doing for the past few years had been downsized, and I was left contemplating my next move. I had some savings, but not enough to sustain me indefinitely without income. One evening, as I sat on the dock watching the sunset reflect off the water, an idea struck me. The lake had always been a source of joy for my family. Why couldn't it also be a source of livelihood? After researching local regulations and permit requirements, I decided to start a small boat rental business. Nothing fancy or disruptive, just kayaks, canoes, and a couple of paddle boats to start. I would target outdoor enthusiasts, families wanting a day on the water, and photographers looking to capture the natural beauty of the area. I spent the winter planning, securing the necessary permits, purchasing equipment, and building a small shed near the dock to store everything. By spring, I was ready to launch Lake Day Rentals. The business got off to a promising start. Word spread quickly about the reasonable rates and the pristine, uncrowded lake. Within a month, I had regular customers and was even thinking about expanding my fleet. I should have known though the HOA would not let this development go unchallenged. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a bright orange notice taped to my shed door one morning. It was styled to look like an official county violation, but it was actually just from the HOA. It said, "Notice of violation, unauthorized commercial activity and structures on community property. Fine, $1,500. All boats and structures must be removed within 7 days." I could not help but laugh at the audacity. They still did not get it. This was not community property, it was my property. I took down the notice and threw it away, continuing business as usual. 3 days later, I was helping a young couple learn the basics of kayaking when a golf cart came speeding down my driveway. The HOA president stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing the kind of forced smile that does not reach the eyes. "Excuse me," she called out loudly, interrupting my instructions. "I need to speak with you about your ongoing violations." I apologized to my customers and walked over to her. "This is not a good time," I said quietly. "I'm in the middle of business." "That's precisely the problem," she replied, voice rising enough for my customers to hear. "You are operating a commercial business on community property without HOA approval." The couple looked confused and I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. "This is not community property," I stated firmly. "This is my private property, as I have explained numerous times, and now please leave. You are trespassing." And by the way, guys, I would wager that goes in one ear of the HOA president and goes out the other right away. Anyway, she waved the clipboard dismissively. "You were informed of the violation 3 days ago. Since you have failed to comply, the fine has now doubled to $3,000. Furthermore, the HOA board has voted to take legal action if you continue this unauthorized use of the lake." I took a deep breath, conscious of my paying customers watching this exchange. "Well, I'm not gonna argue with you here. I've sent multiple letters explaining that my property is not under HOA jurisdiction. I have all proper permits for this business from the county. Now I'm asking you politely to leave my property. The lake is a community resource. Your family may own the shoreline where your house sits, but the lake itself is for everyone's use." And that is when I realized their fundamental misunderstanding. They truly believed the lake was public or community property. In their minds, I only owned the land my house sat on and not the lake itself. Rather than correct her misunderstanding right then, I simply said, "I'm not discussing this any further. Please leave now, or I will have to call the sheriff for trespassing." She half-handed me the clipboard with another violation notice and then stalked back to her golf cart. "This is not over," she called over her shoulder. "You're right about that," I muttered to myself. After she left, I apologized to the couple for the interruption. They were gracious about it, even sympathetic. "We live in a neighborhood with an HOA too," the woman told me. "Some of them let the tiniest bit of power go to their heads." And well, I could not have agreed more. That night, I wrote a formal letter to the HOA board, once again clarifying that my property was not part of their association and they had no authority to issue fines or dictate how I used my land. I deliberately avoided mentioning my ownership of the lake itself, deciding to keep that card close to my chest for now. The HOA's response came in the form of increased pressure from their fishing club members. Suddenly, there were anglers on my lake nearly every day, positioning themselves closer and closer to my rental operation. At first, I tried to be accommodating because the lake was large enough for different activities. But it soon became clear that this was a deliberate strategy to disrupt my business. Fishing club members would loudly complain about the noise from my customers, claiming it was scaring away their fish. They would cast their lines dangerously close to kayakers, creating safety hazards, and some would park their folding chairs right next to my shed, blocking access to the water. One particularly frustrating Saturday, I approached a group of 5 fishermen who had set up directly in front of my launch area. "Excuse me," I said politely. "Would you mind moving a bit further down? My customers need to access the water here." The apparent leader of the group, a beefy guy with an expensive-looking fishing rod, barely glanced up. "We've been fishing this spot for years. Find another place to launch your boats." "This is my property," I explained, struggling to maintain my composure. "I'm happy to share the lake, but you cannot just block access to my business." And then another man chimed in. "The HOA Fishing Club has always used this lake. You cannot suddenly claim exclusive rights." "I'm not claiming exclusive rights," I clarified. "I'm just asking you to move a little ways down the shore so we're not on top of each other." "Look, buddy," the first man said, standing up, "the HOA president told us that we have every right to fish anywhere on this lake. If you've got a problem with that, take it up with her." It was clear they were not gonna move. Rather than escalate a situation, I was forced to help my customers launch from a less ideal spot further down the shore where the bank was steeper and muddier. As the weeks passed, these types of incidents multiplied. I would find my rental signs knocked over, trash would appear near my shed overnight, and paddles would mysteriously go missing only to be found by helpful HOA members days later. Then reviews started appearing online claiming my business was operating illegally and providing poor service on top of that. The reviews all came from accounts with no profile pictures and generic names, clearly fake but damaging nonetheless. I installed security cameras around my shed and dock, which helped reduce the petty vandalism but did not stop the fishing club's deliberate interference. By midsummer, things took an even darker turn. I started getting anonymous phone calls warning me to stop causing problems or face consequences. The calls always came from blocked numbers and the voices were disguised, but the message was clear: shut down my business or else. I reported these calls to the sheriff's department, but without concrete evidence of who was making them, there was not much that they could do. Then came the incident that changed everything. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of my dog barking frantically. Looking out of my bedroom window, I saw an orange glow coming from the direction of the lake. I ran outside to find my rental shed engulfed in flames. I called 911 immediately and then grabbed my garden hose in a futile attempt to fight the fire. By the time the fire department arrived, the shed was completely destroyed, along with all my rental equipment inside, about $15,000 worth of kayaks, paddleboards, life jackets and other gear. The fire inspector found evidence of accelerant and ruled it as arson. The security cameras had been spray-painted black before the fire was set, so I had no footage of the perpetrator. The sheriff's department opened an investigation, but without witnesses or clear evidence pointing to specific individuals, they did not have much to go on. I was devastated not just by the financial loss, but by the escalation to such a dangerous and destructive act. If the fire had spread to my house or the surrounding trees, it could have been much worse. The day after the fire, as I was sorting through the charred remains of my business, the HOA president drove up in her golf cart. "Such a shame about your shed," she said, not sounding remotely sorry. "Perhaps this is a sign that commercial activities don't belong on residential property." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you seriously coming here to gloat after someone committed arson on my property?" She raised her eyebrows in exaggerated innocence. "Oh, I certainly hope you're not implying the HOA had anything to do with this unfortunate incident." "Well, I'm not implying anything," I said coldly. "I'm just finding it interesting that you are here making smug comments instead of showing concern that a crime was committed in your precious community." "Well, I actually came to offer a solution. The HOA would be willing to purchase your property at a fair market value. You could move somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle, and we could then integrate this shoreline properly into our community plan." My blood boiled. "Get off my property, now." "Think about it," she said, ignoring my anger. "After what happened, it's clear you're not welcome here. Why continue fighting? Take the money and start fresh somewhere else." I stepped closer to her, my voice low and steady. "Let me be crystal clear here. I will rebuild, I will continue my business, and if I find out anyone from your association had anything to do with this fire, I will press charges for criminal conspiracy in addition to arson. And now leave before I call the sheriff for trespassing." She did indeed leave, but her visit confirmed what I already suspected. While she might not have personally set the fire, the HOA leadership was at minimum trying to capitalize on the situation and at worst might have encouraged the escalation of harassment into criminal territory. The next day I received an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a crude note made from letters cut from magazines reading, "Next time it will be your house. Leave now." Instead of scaring me off, this threat only strengthened my resolve. I reported this to the sheriff's department, adding it to the ongoing arson investigation file, and then I made two important decisions. Firstly, I would rebuild my business, but bigger and better than before. I would use the insurance money to construct a proper boathouse with security features, expand my fleet and add fishing kayaks to my rentals, a direct challenge to the HOA fishing club. And second, it was time to play my ace card. I contacted my parents' lawyer, who had helped them deal with HOA issues for years and who was now helping me. "I need to make it absolutely clear who owns the lake," I told him during our meeting. "I want to end any confusion once and for all." The lawyer reviewed my deed and property records. "Your ownership is ironclad," he confirmed. "The entire lake bed and water rights belong to you, as they did to your parents. It's all clearly documented here." "Good," I said. "Then I want to do two things. Send a formal cease and desist letter to every HOA household regarding trespassing on my lake and post legally enforceable no trespassing signs around the perimeter." The lawyer frowned. "That's gonna cause quite a stir. Are you sure you want to escalate things further after what happened?" "I'm not escalating," I explained. "I'm establishing boundaries that should have been clear decades ago." The HOA has operated under the delusion that they have some right to the lake. It's time that they learned the truth. He nodded slowly. "All right, I will draft the letters and help you with proper signage wording to ensure it is legally enforceable." 2 weeks later, every household in the HOA received a certified letter outlining the legal facts of my ownership of both the land and the entire lake, including documentation proving this ownership. The letter further explained that while I had previously allowed casual use of the lake, recent events including harassment, business interference and vandalism, and arson had forced me to revoke that informal permission. Effective immediately, the lake was private property with no public access. Anyone entering the lake without my express written permission would be trespassing and would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Simultaneously, I had weatherproof no trespassing private property signs installed around the perimeter of the lake, clearly visible from both the water and the shore. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My phone rang constantly, with angry HOA members demanding explanations. The HOA president called an emergency community meeting, which I was not invited to, but I heard about from a sympathetic neighbor. According to this neighbor, the meeting was chaotic. The HOA president tried to assure everyone that my claims were bogus and unenforceable, but when several residents, including a real estate attorney who lived in the community, reviewed the documentation I'd provided, it became clear that I was on solid legal ground. The fishing club was particularly outraged. The day after the signs went up, several members deliberately took their boats onto my lake, essentially daring me to do something about it. I did not confront them directly. Instead, I called the sheriff's department and reported trespassers on my property. When the deputies arrived, the fishermen arrogantly showed them a letter from the HOA president stating that they had permission to use the community lake. The deputies, who had copies of my property records and the cease and desist notices, explained to the fishermen that the HOA president had no authority to grant permission for use of my private property. They gave these trespassers warnings and escorted them off the lake. This pattern repeated several times over the next few days. Each time I documented the trespassing, called the authorities, and pressed charges against repeat offenders. Obviously, it did not make me popular, but it sent a clear message. I was serious about enforcing my property rights. The HOA tried various tactics to fight back. They filed complaints with the county, claiming my signs violated aesthetic codes. They tried to argue that decades of community use had established a legal easement, and they even attempted to claim my boat rental business violated zoning regulations. None of these tactics works, because my permits were in order, my signage was legal, and their historic use claims held no water against my clear title and deed. As tensions escalated, I received a formal letter from the HOA's lawyer announcing that they were filing a lawsuit against me for discriminatory practices in denying HOA members access to a historic community resource. The letter demanded that I remove all signage and restore full access to the lake immediately or face legal action. Well, rather than intimidate me, this threat made me smile. They had just made a critical mistake by putting their false claims in an official legal document. Now I could prove not only their harassment, but their deliberate attempt to appropriate my property through false legal claims. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who called me back within the hour. They have really stepped in it this time, he said, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. This is a legally frivolous claim that any judge would throw out immediately. But more importantly, it gives us grounds for a robust countersuit. What kind of countersuit? I asked. A countersuit for harassment, attempted conversion of property, defamation related to your business, and potential conspiracy charges if we can link the HOA leadership to any of the vandalism or the arson. Plus, we can demand they pay all legal fees when they lose. I considered this for a moment. Well, let's do it. I'm tired of playing defense. It is time that they learned that they cannot bully people and break laws just because they have an HOA behind them. So instead of backing down, I had my lawyer prepare a comprehensive countersuit that detailed the years of harassment my family had endured, the escalating tactics against my business, and the HOA's repeated false claims about lake ownership. Meanwhile, I continued rebuilding my business. The new boathouse was nearly complete, built with fire-resistant materials and equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. I had ordered replacement boats and equipment and was planning a grand reopening for this spring. The HOA's lawsuit arrived as expected, filled with false claims about historic community use of the lake and allegations that I was discriminating against their members specifically. It demanded the court force me to provide lake access to all HOA residents and pay damages for the so-called loss of community amenity. My lawyer filed our countersuit the same day, along with a motion to dismiss their lawsuit as frivolous and without legal merit. The legal battle was just beginning, but I felt confident for the first time in years. The truth was on my side, clearly documented in property records and deeds. All the HOA had was entitlement and false assumptions. What I did not know yet was that our legal discovery process would uncover far more than just their campaigns of harassment against my family. By forcing them to open their books and communications, we were about to expose a level of corruption within the HOA that would shock even me. The legal process that followed was both exhausting and eye-opening. I knew taking on an entire HOA would not be easy, but I was prepared for a fight. What I was not prepared for was just how deep the corruption ran. About a month after we filed our countersuit, the discovery phase began. This meant both sides had to share relevant documents and information. My lawyer had requested comprehensive records from the HOA, aka financial statements, board meeting minutes, emails between board members, and records of all complaints filed against my property over the years. At first, the HOA's lawyer tried to limit what they would provide, claiming much of it was irrelevant to the case. The judge disagreed though and ordered them to produce everything we had requested. When the documents started arriving, I spent countless hours going through them with my lawyer. Most evenings found me at my dining room table, surrounded by stacks of papers, sticky notes and highlighters, looking for anything that might help our case. "Take a look at this," I said one night, pushing a page towards my lawyer. It was a board meeting minute from 3 years ago, when my parents were still alive. They specifically discussed targeting my family with enhanced enforcement to pressure us to sell. He leaned forward, reading carefully. "This is good. It establishes a pattern of harassment." But that was just the beginning. As we dug deeper into their financial records, inconsistencies started to emerge as well. "These numbers don't add up," I said, comparing statements from different years. The HOA collected over $200,000 in dues last year, but it only shows $120,000 in the expenditures. Where did the other $80K go? My lawyer raised an eyebrow. "That's a very good question." We brought in a forensic accountant to help us make sense of the financial maze. After 2 weeks of analysis, he presented his findings in a detailed report that left us stunned. "It appears," he explained, pointing to his spreadsheets, "that the HOA president and treasurer have been diverting funds to shell companies for at least the past 5 years. These companies supposedly provided landscaping, maintenance, and consulting services to the HOA, but the work was either grossly overpriced or never performed at all." "And who owns these shell companies?" my lawyer asked, though I suspected we already knew the answer. "Well, they are registered under the names of the HOA president's husband and the treasurer's brother-in-law," the accountant confirmed. This was far beyond harassment. This was fraud and embezzlement on a massive scale. The HOA leadership had been stealing from their own members for years. "We need to notify the district attorney's office," my lawyer said, gathering the evidence. "This is criminal activity." I agreed, but also saw a strategic opportunity here. "Before we do that, can we use this in our case against them?" "Well, absolutely," he nodded. "This was completely undermining their credibility and explains their desperate attempts to control your property. They've been using HOA funds like their personal piggy bank, and your lake would have been another asset to exploit." The next revelation came from the emails between board members. In one particularly damning exchange from just before the arson attempt, the HOA president had written, "We need to escalate the pressure. He's as stubborn as his parents. Make it clear that his business is not welcome and won't be allowed to continue." While this did not directly prove their involvement in the fire, it showed intent to disrupt my business by any means necessary. Another email from the fishing club chairman to the HOA president read, "Don't worry, we'll make sure he cannot operate. By the time we are done, he will be begging to sell." Armed with this evidence, we amended our countersuit to include allegations of conspiracy, racketeering, and fraud. We also increased our demand for damages significantly, given the new evidence of malice and organized harassment. The day of the hearing, the HOA president arrived with her lawyer, looking confident as ever. She offered me a smug smile as they took their seats. Her confidence faded quickly as our lawyer began presenting the evidence of financial fraud. As financial records and incriminating emails were displayed on the courtroom screen, her face grew increasingly pale. Her lawyer repeatedly objected, claiming the financial matters were irrelevant to the lake access dispute. The judge shut him down firmly and said, "Counsel, these financial records directly speak to the credibility of your client and the true motivations behind this lawsuit. They are absolutely relevant and frankly deeply troubling." When our lawyer showed the emails discussing escalating pressure on my business, the HOA president leaned over and whispered frantically to her lawyer. The judge noticed and interrupted the presentation. "Does the plaintiff wish to say something?" The HOA's lawyer stood up looking uncomfortable. Your Honor, in light of this new information, we would like to request a brief recess to confer with our client. Granted. 20 minutes, the judge replied, checking her watch. During the recess, I watched the HOA president and her lawyer having what appeared to be a heated argument in the hallway. When they returned, her previously smug demeanor had been replaced by visible anxiety. Their lawyer addressed the court. Your Honor, my client would like to discuss the possibility of settling this matter out of court. Our lawyer shook his head. Your Honor, given the evidence of potential criminal activity, we believe this matter goes beyond civil settlement. We intend to present our findings to the district attorney's office regardless of any settlement. The judge nodded in agreement. I concur. In fact, I'm obligated to report potential criminal fraud when it's presented in my courtroom. She turned to the HOA's lawyer. Counsel, I suggest your client cooperate fully with any investigation. Now, regarding the matter at hand, the lake access dispute, I'm prepared to rule on the defendant's motion to dismiss. She shuffled some papers and then delivered her ruling. Based on the clear property records and deeds presented, the lake in question is unequivocally the private property of the defendant. The plaintiff's claim of historical community use are unsubstantiated and do not override legal ownership. The plaintiff's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. She then addressed a countersuit. Regarding the defendant's counterclaims, I find sufficient evidence to allow them to proceed to trial. However, given the serious nature of the financial fraud allegations, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. With a bang of her gavel, the hearing was adjourned. The HOA president practically ran from the courtroom, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Outside, my lawyer shook my hand. This is a significant victory, but it is just the beginning. The criminal investigation will take time and our civil case for damages will proceed separately. I nodded, feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. What happens now? Well now, he smiled, we wait for the fallout. We did not have to wait too long. The next day, news of the hearing and the judge's referral to the DA's office spread through the community like a wildfire. By evening, a group of outraged HOA members had called for an emergency community meeting to address these allegations. I was not invited, of course, but my sympathetic neighbor attended and filled me in afterwards. It was absolute chaos, he told me, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The treasurer broke down crying and admitted everything when confronted. Said the president had orchestrated the whole scheme and pressured her to go along with it. What about the arson? I asked. He shook his head. No one admitted to that, but the fishing club chairman looked pretty nervous when someone brought it up. I wouldn't be surprised if the investigation turns up his involvement. Over the next few weeks, the community underwent a seismic shift. The entire HOA board resigned under pressure from residents. The president and treasurer were arrested on multiple counts of fraud, as well as embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. The fishing club chairman was brought in for questioning regarding the arson but released pending further investigation. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my business. The new boathouse was completed, more secure and better equipped than before. I expanded my fleet of rental boats and added new options for customers. The grand reopening was scheduled for the first weekend of spring. 2 days before the reopening, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a middle-aged man I recognized as one of the HOA residents, and though not someone who had been directly involved in harassing me. I'm Thomas, he introduced himself somewhat awkwardly. I've been elected as the interim HOA president while we restructure things. Congratulations, I said warily. What can I do for you? Well, he hesitated. I'm here on behalf of the HOA residents. We want to apologize for what the previous board did to you and your family. Most of us had no idea about the fraud or the extent of the harassment campaign against you. I nodded but remained guarded. I appreciate that, but we also want to discuss the lake situation. He continued. We understand it is your private property and you have every right to restrict access, but many families in the community have enjoyed the lake for years without being part of the problems. Kids who grew up swimming there, elderly folks who like to fish, they are devastated by the ban. I had expected this conversation eventually. I banned access because of years of harassment and vandalism that culminated in arson. It was not a decision I made lightly. We understand that. Thomas nodded. The people responsible are facing consequences. What we are hoping is that maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where respectful residents could still enjoy the lake under clear rules and perhaps for a reasonable fee that would compensate you for the access. I considered his proposal. I will think about it, but I need assurances that the new HOA leadership understands boundaries and respects private property rights. Absolutely, he agreed quickly. We are completely restructuring the HOA. More transparency, term limits for board members, and strict oversight of finances. Honestly, we are even discussing whether to continue as an HOA at all or transition to a voluntary neighborhood association with far fewer powers. This caught my attention. That sounds like a positive change. Thomas smiled tentatively. Well, many of us moved here for the community and not for these rules and restrictions. We want to get back to that spirit. After he left, I spent several days thinking about his request. Part of me wanted to maintain the ban out of principle, and after everything my family had endured. But another part remembered how my parents had always been willing to share the lake's beauty with respectful neighbors before the HOA's harassment began. In the end, I decided to offer a compromise. I drafted a proposal for a lake access program. HOA residents could purchase seasonal passes for recreational use of the lake, with clear rules about permitted activities, hours of operation, and conduct expectations. A portion of the fees would go towards lake maintenance and conservation efforts. The new HOA board accepted my proposal eagerly. We signed a formal agreement that explicitly acknowledged my ownership of the lake and outlined the terms of the access program. The document included a clause that any future harassment or vandalism would result in immediate termination of the agreement. My boat rental business reopened successfully that spring, and to my surprise, many HOA residents became regular customers, choosing to rent kayaks or paddle boats rather than just swimming or fishing. Several even apologized personally for not standing up to the previous board tactics. The criminal investigations continued for months. Eventually, the former HOA president pleaded guilty to multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay substantial restitution to the HOA members she had defrauded. The treasurer received a lighter sentence in exchange for her cooperation with the prosecutors. She provided evidence that helped convict the fishing club chairman of arson, proving he had set fire to my shed on the HOA president's instruction. He was sentenced to 5 years for arson and conspiracy. Throughout the criminal proceedings, I attended every hearing. I wanted them to see my face and know that their attempts to bully me off my land had not only failed, but had brought about their own downfall. After the sentencing, my lawyer helped me file insurance claims for all the damage done to my property over the years. With the criminal convictions as evidence, the claims were approved without dispute. The former HOA board members who had participated in the harassment faced civil lawsuits from both me and other HOA residents who discovered that they had been paying inflated dues to fund the board's schemes. Most were forced to sell their homes to cover legal fees and settlements. As for the HOA itself, the members ultimately voted to dissolve it entirely and form a voluntary neighborhood association instead. This new organization focused on community events and property maintenance without the oppressive rules and fines of the former HOA. Thomas, who had approached me about lake access, became the first president of this new association. Under his leadership, they organized community cleanups, holiday celebrations, and even an annual Lake Appreciation Day where residents would help with conservation efforts around the shoreline. 2 years after the lake ban was implemented, I officially lifted it and transitioned fully to the Access Pass system. It proved to be beneficial for everyone involved. The lake was respected and well maintained, my business thrived, and the community healed from the divisiveness of the previous regime. One summer evening, as I sat on my dock watching the sunset, just as my parents had done countless times before, Thomas joined me with 2 bottles of beer. "Beautiful evening," he commented, handing me one of the bottles. "It is," I agreed. My mom used to say that this was the best view in the county. She was right. He took a sip of his beer. You know, most of the new residents don't even know about all this drama that happened. They just think the lake passes and rules were always the way things worked. I smiled at that. Sometimes it's better that way. Really, no need to keep old conflicts alive. True, he nodded. But some of us remember. Some of us know that if you had not stood your ground, that corrupt HOA board would still be running things and stealing from us all. I was just protecting what was mine, I said simply. So yeah, I had kept my promise to protect my parents' legacy, but I had done more than just preserve it. I had helped it evolve into something better. Sometimes I like to think that my parents were watching too, proud that their stubborn child had not only protected the land that they loved, but had transformed decades of conflict into a lasting peace. The kind of peace that can only come when boundaries are clear, rights are respected, and the community is built on mutual understanding rather than control. But tonight I would sleep soundly knowing that after years of struggle, justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and a new chapter had begun, one where an HOA would never again mistake my kindness for weakness or my property for theirs. And now guys, we have an update to the story that is 5 years later. So it is hard to believe 5 years have passed since the whole HOA nightmare finally ended. So much has changed that I thought I would share an update for those who followed my original story. First, the lake access program has been incredibly successful. What started as a tentative compromise has evolved into a beloved community feature. The seasonal passes sell out quickly each year, and we now have waiting lists for the limited number of fishing permits. Also, the revenue has allowed me to hire full-time help for the rental business, which has expanded to include guided nature tours and sunset cruises. However, the former HOA president was released after serving her full 3-year sentence. She moved across the country immediately after release and, as far as I know, has had no contact with anyone from the community since. The fishing club chairman served 4 years of his 5-year sentence before being paroled. He did actually send me a letter of apology from prison, which seemed sincere but did not erase the damage he had done. The voluntary neighborhood association has flourished under rotating leadership. They wisely implemented strict term limits. They focus exactly on what Thomas had envisioned: community events, beautification projects, and supporting local needs. They have no enforcement power, no mandatory fees, and absolutely no delusions about controlling private property. And unfortunately, in that part of the story there were too many personal infos and I don't really want to dox OP, so I had to cut that part out. Also, it was a little bit boring, so whatever. Anyway, several other HOAs in the area have since reformed their operations or dissolved entirely in favor of voluntary associations. My parents' house has seen some changes too. I finally renovated the kitchen last year, something my mom had always wanted to do. I kept my dad's workshop intact though, with all his tools arranged exactly as he left them. Sometimes I go in there just to feel close to him. Also, I've already updated my will to include specific provisions for the lake's management, determined that future generations will enjoy it as my family has. Perhaps the most unexpected development has been my relationship with the community. What was once adversarial has become genuinely supportive. Last winter, when I slipped on ice and broke my leg, neighbors organized a rotation to help with my business operations until I recovered. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had simply given in to the HOA's pressure all those years ago. The lake might have become another overdeveloped amenity, the corrupt board would have continued stealing funds, and my family's legacy would have been erased. And yeah guys, let me know in the comments if you would ever buy a house in an HOA after hearing all these stories. And either way, I will see you again tomorrow. Thank you for watching.